Good. Good to see you.
Good. Yeah, likewise. Are you in Atlanta now?
I am in Atlanta. Um, I'm actually going to head home tomorrow, probably for a week, I imagine.
Right.
So yeah, but got a couple weeks in down here.
Good, good. Pre-planning going well, I'm assuming.
Um, you know, um, it is. We got some struggles going on down here. But the director's wonderful, Kenny Leon. Great guy. So I've enjoyed getting to know him, and it's always interesting at the very beginning of a film that you got to get together in a hurry and also get to know somebody that you're going to make a movie with.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, um, but it's coming along great. It's coming along great. Um, so we'll see. We got a lot to do.
Well,
Uh,
that's good. That's good to hear. And I guess, one of the cool things about, like you said, is getting to know people very quickly in the beginning, but it's funny when you're in production, you don't realize how much you've come to know them. And then when before you know it, the production is over and it's like, whoa, that was quick. I'm sure you experience that all the time.
yeah, it's an interesting thing making movies. I mean, you spend so much time together in this concentrated period, and
Yeah.
then you may not see each other again for years. You know, you'll occasionally bump into somebody, or there'll be a reason for a call, but and I always like to do, especially when it's the first time I've worked with a director, I like to, after the movie is done, sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, just because of the experience of, making a movie together and then seeing how it turns out, and then going back and kind of say, hey, it actually turned out pretty good. Great job. So it's fun to reconnect after, the intensity and these days that you come and you shoot, and you're so focused on just getting the work done and
Right.
solving the problems that you don't have a lot of time to get to know each other on a personal level. A lot of times, you don't have that opportunity, and sometimes it's better after the fact to kind of sit down and have a meal or just a cup of coffee and go, hey, I love what you did there.
Yeah.
So anyway.
That no, that's good. It's funny you mentioned that because I remember I was watching a clip on like Kevin Bacon. I think he was on Howard Stern's show. And he mentioned the same thing. Like one thing that really bothered me over the years was you make a movie, you get to know people, and everybody disappears, and then nobody gets in touch. And then it
Right.
took him like a long time to get used to it because not everybody's, everybody has a different personality. And it's interesting that people do move on and people do forget, and it's not in any way intentional to hurt anybody. It's just life moves forward, and everybody's busy.
Right. And you go back to your personal lives and your families and your friends back home.
Yeah, yeah,
It's really two different lives.
100%. Uh, saw Wonder again. I saw it first time, I would say probably 2018, 2019. Around that time. I think it came out in 2017, with my kids who were 6 and 7 at the time. And it struck a chord at that time, and then I watched it again this morning. And again, same thing. It's a very, straightforward, simple story that a lot of people can relate to. And, despite the fact that it was based on a novel, it had a very much feeling of Chris Columbus films like Mrs. Doubtfire, Home Alone, 9 Months. And it, it just was again, like I said, very simple but very powerful and effective film. How did you come on board with Stephen? I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'd let you do it. Stephen Chbosky?
Chbosky.
Chbosky. How did you get on board on that film? Um, from the beginning process, basically.
Um, I believe it was David Hoberman, the producer, who I had worked with in the past, and
Hmm.
and his partner, Mandeville. Entertainment. I believe they were the ones that brought me into the mix. You know, they had fallen in love with the project, and you know, I think David went to Julia and got her interested, and you know, it was one of those kind of projects where you know, it kind of fed on the script and what the film was about. And the author of the book, she came and visited. She was wonderful. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, so where did this come from? You know, where did you get the idea to write this book, and why? And she says, well, to be honest with you, you know, I took my kids in to get ice cream, and there was one of these kids in the store, and I was, you know, I was really kind of taken, you know, almost appalled by the behavior of my kids and how they reacted to what was going on. And so she
Wow.
said, you know, I've got to write a book about this so that, you know, ultimately it's fair and people just need to understand what's really going on. And, you know, it's not something horrible. It's actually, you know, there's a kid in there. And so the book became hugely successful. And, you know, it's like every fifth grader, you know, in a lot of places it's required reading. And I had never heard of the book until we made the movie. And it was the first time working with Stephen, and he's a writer, very successful screenwriter, and had
Mm-hmm.
directed a couple of movies. And so I really enjoy working for writers. I really enjoy that part of the process where you know, and he didn't originally write the script either, which is really quite interesting. But he had done a movie about teenagers, you know, a successful movie about teenagers. And so he kind of, you know, fit into the mold of whatever they were looking for when they were looking for a director. And so, you know, he eventually he got involved in the writing ultimately, and it has a writing credit on the movie. So he did actually get involved. It's impossible not to, I imagine.
Right.
Um, and so, you know, I kind of love that experience, just working with writers and how they describe what the scene is about and how it plays into the screenplay. And so I love that part of it. And he was, you know, terrific with those kids. All those kids have gone on to be successful actors in their
Right.
own right, you know. But you know, great casting, and ultimately, you know, getting all those kids ultimately to be kids, you know, on camera is, you know, it's great. It's great. And Jacob Tremblay was a star before the
Yeah.
movie. And
You mentioned, sorry, go on.
oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say you mentioned that how you like working with writers because they can describe a scene, you know, probably a little bit more effectively than just a director, with obviously exceptions. Is it, you know, in terms of other writers that you may have worked with in the past, do you feel that it's been consistent difference between writer director and a just director in in any project?
Sure. Absolutely. Um, I think that, you know, I work with Brian Helgeland on 42. He started out, you know, as a writer first, then became a director, and, you know, it does both, and, you know, a very successful screenwriter, and also become a, you know, a very successful director. You know, you know, and of course, Zemeckis wrote screenplays also, and still writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you know, I think that I enjoy the process with the writer that's, in essence, they're more writer than they are director when they start out, and eventually they become more director. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's as they're finding their footing and finding their voice with images that they've had as a writer, that you know, some can make the transition and some can't. You know, it's literally, you know, like when I asked a writer, said, you know, so, you know, what did you see up here when the kid's up on the stage? And he says, well, I don't know. He says, I've only seen it from the kid's point of view looking out into the audience. He's never thought about the fact that, well, he's up on stage and the audience needs to see him up on stage. And now what's behind him? And what do you see? All those things. Oh, it's like taking it out of a book and, or out of a written page and then putting it on the screen for an audience to understand. So there's a language that they need to learn, that they have to take the writing half off, put the directing hat on to make the movie.
That's interesting. You mentioned that how in the book you're always looking at it from the protagonist standpoint. And, it's so true, but I never actually thought about that because as a director myself, like I think always like a director, like what the background would be, this scene would be and that scene would be. So
Sure.
it's fascinating how people's minds work and, everybody's different.
Yeah. I mean, so I come in, as the cinematographer, and I'm like, well, look, I think we need to see this, and then the audience will understand this, and then we need this shot, and we'll come around and see. I see the movie. I'm always got a movie playing in my head, So when I'm reading the page, I'm making the movie as I'm reading the page, and so a lot of times I'm missing the, the actual red dot of the scene, what it's really all about, because of the words and how people are, what they're saying and maybe what they're not saying ultimately. And so a lot of times I'm fascinated by how it's edited together and how, where I've seen two different editors cut the same scene together, and it's like, whoa, that's amazing, the difference between what those two editors saw in the material and what they cut together. And so that's, it's the fascinating thing about cinema in itself, is ultimately what all those images mean when you tie them together.
Yeah, speaking of editing, one thing I really loved about the editing, it treated the film as a book, right? Chapters, and especially the first chapter and the second chapter. When the second chapter begins with the sister, which played by Isabella, I think, you see her day in the second chapter that was already happening in the first, and then you see her whispering into her brother's ear, which we don't hear in the first chapter, but we hear in the second. And I thought that was really, really cool and neatly done. Just giving her perspective, and it felt like a book. It literally felt like a book, the whole movie.
Yeah, which I love, and it brought kind of the innocence to it, like it was a book written for fifth graders, so we as adults get to sit there and kind of enjoy this movie as kids again in some ways. And I don't know what it is about that film, but I cry every time I see it. There's just certain scenes that get to me between, especially, the mother and the father and the child, because I have kids and I have grandkids, and I going through this for a while, that I think it touches me on that level. And so, another interesting thing about filmmaking is that, if you make a movie, it's going to touch people from 8 to 80, but in different ways. Like what they get out of that.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because when I was watching it the second time, I mean, just like yourself, there were moments that really tore me up. And I thought about it in that moment, that why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? Is it because I have kids? Or is it because I'm remembering something from the past? Or is it something that I can relate to? And it's really hard to pinpoint that, but I think it's a combination of everything, because we remember our childhood. We all go through stuff, right? Everybody's gone through different challenges and stuff. And we just connect to those characters, and they're so well written. There's certain moments between the daughter and the mother, being ignored by her parents, that, Augie is the world. So I think it's a combination of things. I was thinking about that too. Like, why is it affecting me? Because I mean, I don't necessarily have a child that's going through something like that, but still.
Right. I mean, listen, I just went through something with I have two older sisters and a brother, and I just went through a moment with one of them, and they were, they said something about, of course, our childhood, and I'm like, really? Well, that's interesting. I never really saw it like that before, and same parents, two older sisters, one younger brother, and we all have our way that we saw it and what we grasped from those situations as children growing up. It's really interesting. So I think that as I ended up because of my daughter gave me this Christmas present. It was called Storyworth, and every week, you get this question they send you, and you have a file, and so you have to answer the question. And the question is, where was your first school, and what was your first trip you went on with the family, and all this thing is kind of, that you did as a child growing up into adulthood, and all these different questions. So you get one for every week for a year, and then you write these, and so I wrote all these little stories about the questions, about all that, and so I finished it, and then you make a little book out of it. And so, I gave one to each one of the grandkids, and sent it to my siblings. And so, they all read it. I was like, so, did I get this stuff right? Is that how you guys remember it? And for the most part, they enjoyed it, and they liked the storytelling. But it was pretty funny to kind of, have these conversations with my adult, my one sister's 74, the other sister's 71, and then myself, and I have a younger brother who's 65, 64, 60, 65, and so it's interesting. You kind of take these moments and you relate to your siblings on a level that I don't think you would do at our ages, unless it wasn't something bringing up those questions. And so I think cinema does a lot of that. Cinema does a lot of, you sit in that theater and you connect to these characters on some kind of a level that makes you think about this stuff. And the great filmmakers just have a way of having a point of view and showing us something ultimately, which is a simple story, like Wonder, and yet kind of brings out these emotions and feelings in us that are inside of us. And like I said, the movie makes me cry. Now, when I read the script, it didn't make me cry.
Fascinating. Interesting.
I didn't like, I might have said, well, this will be good. My wife's really going to like this part, or things like that.
Yeah.
But certainly after making it and then watching it, and I remember when I did the DI on the movie, I would get choked up. I'm like, and that's actually never happened to me that I can remember anyway. And so I found it really interesting, and I was fascinated by that it had that effect on me.
That is pretty interesting, and in a different way cool at the same time, because I also think some movies, there are so many movies, like family movies that come out, or relationship movies, whether it's was it The Whale that came out last year,
Right.
or Chris Columbus stuff, John Hughes, or other family films that come out. Most of them you don't feel the same way as you would with the others. And I wonder sometimes, is it because the director or the writer, or in this case, the director, because it was one experience that changed into the other, they incorporate a lot of their personal stuff because they went through it. Because you can feel, when you feel that emotion,
Right.
I sometimes feel that there's something personal in there that just clicks with us because it's genuine and it's real.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
And yeah.
Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. I thought you were done with your thought. I'm done. Go ahead.
I'm not even quite sure what I was going to say, to be honest with you, where I was going. But I think what it's about is tone. So when you see a Chris Columbus movie, there's a certain tone to that movie, right? And on Wonder, it had this kind of a light tone of this nice kind of family. Obviously, there's you could play that really dark. You could play that miserable. You could really push the misery of that kid a long way.
Mm-hmm.
But yet the tone of the screenplay and the casting and the art direction and the cinematography, put that film in I think the right tone
100%. I agree with you.
for the way that story should be told. And I think you don't have to get gritty and down and harsh to get certain things across,
Yeah.
right? Emotions across to the audience. So I think it's always important to figure that out with every movie that you make, and struggle with it, and when I figure out how to light a movie, when I figure out how to shoot a movie and what lenses I'm going to use and light and composition and color, I really I fight with that right up to sometimes to the first day of shooting, and sometimes into the film. I try to get it all figured out because I like to have a game plan from beginning to end before I start shooting. That's ultimately the best, way to start, but it doesn't always happen. Sometimes you keep fighting with it, and as the movie kind of takes shape, and as you start shooting and you start seeing the performances, and then you kind of grasp onto it, and you kind of get a feel for it. It starts making sense.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
tough.
No, for sure. Before I go into the technical aspects, I just wanted to ask about one more thing. You talked about, choking up and all that. What was a scene that you were on the set the first time that it did it get to you? Is there a certain performance or certain scene that got to you in that moment while you were working?
Um, I think that I thought the mother-daughter stuff was really good in the way that they performed, especially Julia.
Mm,
And especially when she ended up being in the play. And of course, there's a little bit of humor where Owen Wilson has his glasses on, and Julia forgot her glasses. And of course, once they realize that that's her on stage, she steals the glasses off her husband, which is, a funny moment and true. And that'll always happen. And then at the end, when she sees her daughter, and has to put it all together, like, oh my God, I've been so focused on my son and his problems, and you were the easy kid, and you just kind of seemed to always know what you were doing, and I'm so sorry, ultimately,
yeah.
that I, have left you to fend for yourself ultimately, and growing up, as a teenager, no easy choice, and so it's a great moment, and I think it works out wonderful in the movie. And that moment gets to me every time I see it. When she comes backstage after the play, and the two of them, meet eye to eye.
I literally, when I saw it this morning, that scene when she just goes like this,
But she just
like,
points at her.
yeah, and she doesn't say a word. Oh, yeah, you're so right. That was just so, and her performance was amazing. It was just powerful, very powerful.
Yeah.
Uh, Technically, Don, when you decided to work on this film and trying to get a feel of the lighting, of the cinematography, how were you going to approach it? What was that story like? Like, what kind of process you went through? Did you change back and forth, or was it easy to figure out working with Stephen?
Um, Stephen was, very open to ideas, and I suggested that we would take an hour every morning, and just go through the script page by page.
Hmm.
And and not try to, work fast through it. Just start with scene one. What do you see? And then, what is our transition to scene two? I always like to try to get transitions thought about between scenes? How do you see it? You know, where do you think you'll start on? Where do you think we can go with this? So I'll do that page by page. You just do an hour every morning and get as far as you get, because the directors they're so busy. They're casting, they're looking at props, they've got to look at locations. There's just a million things they got to do all at the last minute before you shoot a movie. But I always try to get that time with the director to go through the script page by page, quietly, just the two of us, with everybody else asking questions, and just develop a language of how we're going to shoot the movie. And then learn from, ask them questions and learn from their responses to what they're seeing and what they want to see, and where this thing is going. And then, as you scout locations with the production designer, you start looking at locations and you start narrowing them down. So, we looked at a lot of schools, shot the movie in Vancouver.
Oh, did you? Okay, I didn't. Okay.
Shot it in Vancouver, and then there was a second unit that my son shot actually in New York City afterwards in post-production.
Okay.
You get some of those wider shots to establish the whole New York City part of it. And so, just right down to, we look at schools, and the production designer, she was wonderful. And she had all kinds of things that she was showing us. And Stephen was kind of looking like this, it's trying to grasp the feeling for the school and what it should be and where these scenes would take place and all that. And so I try to like reel them in. I try to reel them in. I listen to the production designer and why, this school and why we could do this and how this will work and the feeling of the school itself. And I try to ground him and land him, especially with Stephen, because he's being a writer, he's out here a lot. And so I try to bring him back down to, okay, here we are. Here's the cafeteria. They're the bad kids sitting over there. Here's our kids sitting here, and you can see them, and we got a shot of him in the foreground, and they're in the background, and maybe the girls are over there, and you start diagramming it and looking at it and trying to land it, and so and you do that in all the different places that you look, and then ultimately, the production designer's first choice was the school that we shot, and ultimately it was mine also, once we looked at all the schools. And so it was then kind of like making the director kind of feel comfortable in this particular school, because, well, look, we can shoot this here, and this could be the classroom, and this is a good classroom, and where are the kids going to sit? Well, maybe he's going to sit here, and that's where the empty seat is, and all these kids in the front row and the bad kids sit in the back, and they have to relate to each other. So you start figuring out where to put all those kids, you start talking through, and then let's go outside, and, well, can we shoot this school for the outside and this school for the inside? Maybe. Can we do this? Where the parents walk up and they drop them off, and he takes the helmet off of them. Look at this spot right here. This works nice. Look at so you kind of go through it shot by shot, and you try to ground the film in an aesthetic that makes sense. And it all starts, at first there's so much, but ultimately you gotta land, and you gotta hang your hat, and you gotta start, and you gotta work through it all the different scenes that you're gonna accomplish. And it's gonna start feeling right. You're gonna go with your gut at a certain point and say, practically, yes, we can shoot here. We have all the elements to shoot the movie here. Is it, what's better about that school? What do you like about that school versus this school? And then, you kind of ultimately find it, and starts making sense, and starts feeling good, and starts feeling like a movie. And ultimately, I think you're just making a big stew at the end of the day, and you just keep putting the ingredients there,
Yeah.
You keep stirring, until it tastes good, and gets to the right temperature. So, it's an interesting process. And when you first start, you can't imagine that you're going to actually find all of it. but we're all making a movie. Everybody's making a movie in their head. Everybody working on the movie's making a movie in their head. And then ultimately, you got to try to land on making the right movie, and understand ultimately the movie that's going on in the director's head. At the end of the day, you got to have a captain of the ship, and that's ultimately going to drive all of us, the right direction. Hopefully, the wind's blowing the right direction once we put all this together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing you mentioned about positioning kids in the classroom, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I noticed it normally in a film, in a story like this, where there's bullies and there's a kid who's going through stuff, he or she's always sitting in the back, always. And in this film, he was sitting in the far corner left in the front. I mean, it kind of dictates his position of a character too, but I thought that was really, it was obviously different, but it was also the relationship that he had with the other kid who was mean to him. I forget his name.
Mhm.
But just making that eye contact back and forth, especially when he introduces himself and then he questions him, you have that Jedi thing on, and
Yeah.
that was pretty cool, I thought.
Right. Yeah. I think Stephen's idea there, if I'm not mistaken, was that where Augie was sitting was in a position where the kids could only see him from the back, because it was all about
Hmm.
not being able to look at his face, and all the kids look down at. They don't actually look at him; they look down at the floor.
Yeah,
So he's always looking down at the floor, and he's always looking at people's shoes, and you can tell a lot about people by their shoes. That whole bit.
right.
So yeah, and then it was for me, it was his relationship to the other kids. The kid that has the first and last name, Jack Will,
Hmm.
who becomes his best friend.
Right, right.
Wonderful young actor who just took off after this. It's done very well. And then where the other girls were sitting up front, and the relationship with Augie, and seeing the bad guys behind him in the shot. And so I'm always looking when it comes to placing people, I think Stephen would start with the writer in him first and put people in positions because of their character. And then I would come in behind that and go, yeah, but can we move him over a seat that way so we have a shot of him? Because here's Augie, right in the
Hmm.
foreground. He's in the background. We can see him there, right? And then if he's there, then we can shoot across this way. And then when Augie's looking at him, we got this. And so, I'm looking at that once we kind of have a theory about where kids would be in the classroom. Then I just kind of help shift around to get it so that we have shots, right? Make
Hmm.
it get into the box, as I call it. We got to get it into this frame. And so, which is, it's that's to me, that I love doing that. I love being able to get shots, but make it feel organic and dramatic when it needs to be, but also
Yeah.
kind of keep it on that edge where it feels real, even though it is cinematic.
Yep.
So
Yep. And speaking of that real part, there was one scene that it really got to me too, was when Miranda is calling and Augie picks up and the camera dollies in when she's sitting on the staircase and it never cuts and you always hear Augie's voice instead of cutting back to him. And
right.
the movement of the camera was so much in synergy with her emotion, and this is not a question, this is just a comment. Like I really love the way you pulled in on her, and as she was going through different emotions and looking up and down and confused and trying to hide her emotions, but also trying to show them at the same time.
Yes. So those discussions are always, it's interesting because they're gonna show you spaces to shoot the mother and the daughter in,
Mm,
and um the only thing that I really liked about that location was that staircase and the glass that was to her left, camera right.
Mm-hmm.
That it gave you the dynamics for that moment of a phone conversation where you couldn't cut to the other side. It just had to play on her. It gave us the ability to use the camera move to keep the interest on this side of the conversation. Like, I don't think you miss not cutting to the other side of the conversation. I think it plays really well in that one shot of her. Great performance, you know. But it was that feeling like, yeah, I think we can make this work. I think we can make this interesting. I think this image and this composition and this camera move is going to work in the situation. I always, when it comes to those double conversations, I always kind of set up the idea of generally we're going to be left to right on this side of the conversation. And when we shoot the other person, it's going to be generally right to left.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of set up these opposing conversations as you cut back and forth, right? So like if they were in the same room, you would set up one as a right to left, the other one's a left to right, ultimately when you get into the close-ups, right? So I always approach it that way on phone conversations so that it gives you a starting point. Now, a lot of times we'll do double moves, right? So sometimes we'll do a little bit of a wrap and you know, you try to make it interesting, but you also want to make it cinematically in sync with the structure of the scene. So the pace of the camera move and where you are in the scene has to all kind of mirror each other to a certain degree to get to the moment that it all connects. And so it's a starting point always in a phone conversation, you know, when you block one out. And from there, it'll evolve and it'll get, you know, it'll become what it becomes, but that's a good starting point always when you're going to shoot a conversation like that.
Was there ever a scene filmed with Augie, or was that always a preconceived setup that we're not going to do that?
It was a preconceived setup to do it without shooting the other side.
Awesome.
And that's, you know, they're tricky because when you read them sometimes, and it's funny in this movie I'm doing right now, there's several of them. I'm like, we got to shoot the other side here. I'm just not feeling great about a scene this long and not cutting to the other side. So, you know, they're interesting questions, and that one, you know, I thought that one worked fine.
Yeah, it did.
And so, and I don't know if we ever had a conversation about shooting this side. I don't remember, to be honest with you. But I don't recall.
I was curious.
I don't recall shooting Augie in that situation. You know, it was a difficult. He's in so many scenes, and I believe his makeup time started out as 3 hours, and eventually it might have gotten down to 2 hours by the end of it. It took that long to get him ready. Now he was young at that time, so you know, you might only have him on the set for 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
That's it. So you have to ultimately, there's a lot of scenes where he's, you know, you got to shoot him out and do the coverage without him, or do his, in essence, the master and his coverage. That's all the time we got. He goes away, and then you got to shoot all the other parts of the scene without. And that happens with kids a lot anyway, just because of their time limitations on a movie set. But because of makeup, that made it even a really tough situation.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what cameras did you guys film it on?
That would have been the Red Weapon, I think.
Okay.
In that era, I think, or the one previous to that. I'd have to think back. I don't recall exactly, but it was a red camera. The lenses, I should have looked up this stuff
That's okay. That's okay.
because they're starting to all blend together in some way. Because I wasn't shooting 8K at that time. I wasn't using Primo 70s. And so it would have been either 4K or 6K, and probably I would have used gosh.
That's okay. Don't worry about
Yeah,
it. I didn't mean to put you in the
yeah,
spot. Just
sorry.
just curious. It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, no, but I think Red had at the time Weapon Dragon, but that was 6K, I think. And then
Yeah,
um
all
I
right.
think the 8K was called Monstral or something. I'm not sure. I could be dead wrong. But in any case, I mean, we talked about a few things in the film, the emotions and the design, production design and planning. What was one scene, and I ask you this all the time I speak to you, that was challenging, but at the same time very fun to do, in a way that it was something new that you had to tackle? I mean, the film looks pretty straightforward and simple in terms of story and everything, but I'm sure, behind the scenes, there's always stuff that how to tackle certain things. Was there anything like that you can remember?
I think the biggest challenge of that movie is the amount of time you actually have those kids.
Mm,
You have to be super efficient with the kids, how you're going to shoot them. Sometimes you have to start scenes with half the kids. You don't even have all the kids when you start shooting. You have to figure out how to break up the coverage so that you can shoot other kids when other kids are going to lunch, or that's all the time you have with them that day.
yeah,
So I think that's the biggest challenging of doing those types of movies and making it feel seamless. Like everybody's there all the time, and that you don't have that, you know. And so as I think back on it, that was probably the biggest challenge.
mm,
Um, it was a very positive experience on the set, in that people were all in on making this movie. It was obviously made for a price. You don't have all the money in the world to make those kind of movies. So a lot of
mm,
people are making sacrifices in their salaries and their commitments and time to make films like that. And so that was, so it kept the everybody was there for the right reasons.
yeah,
So that was great. I was seeing
right.
if I I was trying to see if I had that information here.
No
It's
problem.
it's actually it's driving me crazy that I don't remember. I've got all let's see. Yeah, so it was Panavision. So they were primos. And
Mm,
and and so there was probably, if I was using Panavision, it would have been DXLs, I think.
okay, okay, okay. Well, thanks for looking that up. I appreciate it. Um, when the film came out, were your grandkids old enough at the time? Did you take them to see
Well,
them
but
in the movie
I
set?
have some older ones, the ones that are now 15, 17, and 18. Um, they're actually in the movie.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, so they came to visit me in Vancouver. And so when you see, the family walking to school, there's three boys behind them walking. And that's my grandsons. And so they used the shot twice. That's actually twice in the movie where they used it.
Yeah.
They're in both shots. And then they also made it onto the poster. They used that picture of the family walking to school in the poster, and you see my three grandkids in the background behind them.
Oh, that's awesome. They must have got a double the fun out of it, watching a good film and also being their grandfather
Yeah,
shot it and
yeah,
them
yeah.
being in it.
Yeah, so they've the older boys have had a chance to, they were on the set with the Muppets. They got pictures with the Muppets, and and they got to be in that film for a minute, and so they've had fun doing that. The little ones, none of the little ones have been anywhere near it yet. So,
Yeah.
the parents are like, well, what about, the rest of them? I'm like, yeah, well, you got to bring them to wherever I'm making a movie, because I don't make them here much anymore, make them in Hollywood much anymore.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, it's good
And
fun.
what did they think of the film? Like after they saw it, did they come and tell you their thoughts and their
Um, you know, they they're kind of funny actually. When they saw Aquaman, we had
Hmm.
a nice little family premiere of Aquaman at the local theater with lots of friends, and when the movie was over, I said, "What'd you think?" And the young one said, "Finally, Grandpa, you make a good movie."
Wow. Only
There you
kids
go.
can say something great
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
so when they get older, they may look back
That's
on it.
awesome.
That's actually a really nice movie, but I think they were too young to kind of express
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, no, the films that you saw of mine, like my kids have not seen it because they don't want to because of the
Right.
topic and the intensity of it. And kids just don't really get into that kind of stuff unless, even if there is, they may just say, oh, well, this was something wrong with this and this, I can make that understand because they're just honest and straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, when is Here coming out? I thought it was going to come out this year. It looks like it's 2024 now.
Yes. So I'm gonna do the color timing of that in December. And so I haven't heard of a release date yet on that movie. Um, but they've had test screenings, and
I read about that this morning.
oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's on a month ago. Somebody posted like a paragraph how it seems like a distant cousin of Forrest Gump with the
Oh, is that
time
right?
movie. Yeah, yeah,
And maybe that somebody hasn't even seen the movie. They just see the
yeah,
Tom Hanks is in it, Robin Wright and Bob Zemeckis directing, and Eric Roth co-writing the screenplay with Bob. So yeah, so there's similarities there. That's where it ends, though. It has nothing to do with that story.
No, no, I figured. I think he was just saying from a standpoint of time shifting. In Forrest Gump, it shifted over like 20, 30
Oh,
years or whatnot. In
oh,
that
that's
sense, I think.
yeah, no, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, this has a much bigger time shift involved, which makes it interesting. But I haven't seen the movie yet, and I'm looking forward to seeing it in December when I do the DI. Um, and which means I'll still be in Atlanta, and on the weekends I'll go into a facility here in Atlanta, and
mm,
they'll project it onto a screen, and I'll be able to talk to the colorist in Los Angeles live. So that's
that's good.
yeah, it's a good thing we can do that now, because
Yeah,
it's
no, I, I'm so excited about that film. You have absolutely no idea. I'm really, really anticipating that. I think after Napoleon, that's probably one of the top three films I'm looking forward to in the next few months or whenever it comes out.
so I just saw the ad for Napoleon, and it's coming out Thanksgiving weekend, and then
Yeah, yeah.
um, the Scorsese movie came out last weekend. I haven't seen it yet.
Neither have I. I'm looking forward to it.
Or that, yeah, I'm going to go early because it's a 3 hour movie.
Three and a half. Three and a half, I read.
Is it 3.5? By God.
That's that's what I read.
Yeah. God, they keep
Uh,
getting everything
well,
else has
it's
gotten shorter, smaller, and faster, except movies. It's crazy.
yeah, sometimes it's a good thing, but it depends if it works, I guess. Again, going back to that whole discussion of if you don't feel the movies long enough, then it's great. But if, even the
Right.
shortest movies feel like eternity, so as long as it's done really,
Did you
really
see
well. And
Oppenheimer?
yes, I did.
And
Did you?
I did, and that's a 3 hour movie.
What did you think of it?
Well, ultimately, I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
There's just certain things that I didn't like about it. but overall, a lot about it I liked. I think that the lead actor is a wonderful actor, and I really enjoy watching him on the screen, him playing
Yeah.
that role. It was interesting though, Matt Damon, who I love, I didn't like in the movie. So there was a lot of things that took me out of the movie. And other parts of it I thought were, and in a lot of Nolan's films, a lot of stuff in the movie is so good and so well done and thought out. And other stuff I just kind of takes me out of the film for a while, and then I get back into it I think when he gets back focused on, the story he's telling.
Yeah, I gotta see it again because what threw me off in the film was the constant switch between 70 millimeter, like the IMAX, and the 35 millimeter, and then also I just felt there was no breathing room. The music was there throughout the film. The editing was really fast paced. It was a great history lesson. Like I learned a lot. Maybe I need to watch it again because
Right,
it's probably one of my least favorite Christopher Nolan films from a film standpoint, not
right,
from a
right.
yeah, it took me out of the film so many times. So many times I got out of it, but maybe I need to watch it again.
Yeah. Well, I think that we agree on that, parts of it I really enjoyed, and parts of it, take you out of the movie. So I didn't know if it was because it's a 3-hour movie, and, I don't know, but I can't say that I was looking at my watch ever. Like I wasn't sitting there bored at any moment in the film.
Yeah, neither was I. Neither was I. Neither was I. Yeah.
Whatever he's doing is always interesting, but I just, it's hard for me to explain. I think that the topic is fascinating, but I didn't like where he changed history. And I'm not quite sure exactly why he would do that, but maybe it has to do with keeping the audience understanding so many different characters that are in the film.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, the Albert Einstein moment where he goes back and, checks the math in essence. And Einstein basically says, um, that's not my specialty, this particular thing, but, and he actually never had that conversation with that guy. I was with a
Yeah.
different guy. So there's things like that I'm gonna go, well, why now? Did you really need to do that? Because the audience recognizes this character and they're not going to recognize the other character. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I
No, it's
question things like that that bothers me.
yeah. No, it's so true. And I truly felt after I finished watching the film that I would love to see this movie as a 4-part series. So it's more spaced out, it's more explained better. The characters are way more developed because there's a lot of like Emily Blunt's character wasn't really there that much. I mean, it was just I felt that she was there, but it just wasn't developed much. But anyways, I mean, it's just a thought process. Anyways, it's
Right.
nothing. Christopher Nolan's not gonna go back and recut the film because I think of it a different
Yeah,
way.
no.
So,
No, listen, he's making movies about very serious topics, and they're grand
yeah,
epic movies, and people are showing up to see him. And
100%.
I applaud him for that, because cinema is something I love, and to not be able to go to the movie theaters has been, it's been tough, and the collective experience of watching something on the screen with the audience is still the best. It's so much better than watching a film anywhere else.
You're so right. I actually felt that 3 times this year watching Oppenheimer, Mission Impossible, and Barbie. It's
Mhm.
been a long time that I actually, because of COVID, and even before COVID, I was really
Right?
busy. I rarely used to go to movie theaters, and um, but yeah, it's great to be back in movie theaters for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Don, for your time. I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll talk again sometime in the new year, and wish you all the best on the production and other things, and take care.
All right. Enjoyed speaking with you again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Likewise.
All
Pleasure.
right.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment, and do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.